Hi everyone, so a follow-up on Elder Scrolls Online because a strange thing happened. I told you the other day about how grindy the game is, and that is still true. It still takes far too long to walk between various places, and the quest chains and the way the quest hubs kind of work is just disjointed and useless. It'll need overhauling in the future. But a fun game started to emerge. I started to enjoy myself. I started to care about my character a little bit. I even had a moment where I actually felt like a hero. This was a revelation because it took me about 12 hours to get to a point where I was like, okay, there's actually something underneath all of this mess. Now, just to kind of recap as it were, I'm now level 14. I've gone through 3 of the dungeons. I've also done some of the PvP, which doesn't kind of follow necessarily the traditional model of having kind of structured PvP and then open world PvP. It's just open world PvP. And the map is phenomenally large. I would say you're playing on one single map, which is about the size of all 4 of the Guild Wars 2 World v World maps, but put together. That's what it kind of feels like, and especially when I'm walking across the damn thing. Now, the way that the PvP kind of hangs together is actually quite well done. It basically takes everything we've seen in Warhammer Online, Guild Wars 2, and it kind of amps it up a bit with bigger keeps, more siege equipment, and generally speaking, the same kind of formula. Everybody rolls up to a keep, they capture the surrounding capture points, which are lumber camps, mines, and so on. Then they take on the fort. Defenders can defend the fort. You're effectively acquiring honor points, if you want to call it that, for every kill and for every success. You can then spend those points on more siege equipment, repairing your keep and so on. You also, every time you do a successful action, as it were, like capturing a keep or so on, you will receive some items basically sent to you in the mail, and a random item drop basically from in your mailbox. Now, this is where things get quite interesting. There's no auction house in this game. Not as such, not in the sense of let's go to an auction house, throw all our stuff in the auction house, sit back, it'll sell. What you do now is you have to join guilds. Those guilds, you can join 5 guilds at a time. Guilds can then open a shop. The shop is where you load all your stuff onto. Other guild members can buy those items, or if your guild has grabbed a keep in the open PvP area, any player from across the mega server, obviously in your faction, can visit your keep shop and buy your stuff. This really changes the dynamic, and to begin with I was thinking that isn't going to work. Well, actually on the first day I sold 8 items. I was like, oh, okay, it does work. Because of the way that the game is kind of structured, PvP is actually kind of an integral point here. If people want to be able to buy items, to improve their character without having to just go and grind for it, they'll have to go and visit the PvP areas. Everything is kind of intertwined in a way that makes you kind of feel like the PvP is a great extension of the story that's going on in the PvE and vice versa. It kind of just hangs together really nicely in a way that I wasn't really expecting. Now, I'm still trying to get my mount. It's still 17,000 gold, and I've still only got 4,000 gold. Unfortunately, at the moment, I'm kind of spending more money than I'm making. I'm just kind of standing still. That will presumably start to improve because I've noticed the amount of money I'm getting from quests is going up now. But overall, the way that Elder Scrolls kind of hangs together is very old school. I mean, this is, if you go back to MMOs maybe 8 or 9 years ago, that's what this is. It really is. It feels almost like the beginning of the golden age of MMOs again. But unfortunately, having not learnt anything from the golden age of MMOs about things you really shouldn't do, the game is really slow, and that is kind of to its detriment over that first 6 to 8 hour period. But once you hit level 10, and then consequently level 12 as well, when you effectively open up PvP and then the dungeons, that's where the game kind of becomes, well, it comes to life at that point, and it starts to feel really good. The combat dynamic of 4-man dungeons would initially feel quite limited, but again, it actually fixes a problem. One of the issues that we tend to have in dungeons and raids and so on is way too much going on for a healer or a tank to be able to kind of keep it all together, and so you end up with stray mobs attacking, a controller or something like that, you know, a support caster, or you have the healer simply not being able to actually heal 4 people plus themselves and stay out of combat and everything else. By reducing it to 4, but actually still keeping the mob count very high in my opinion. You can have encounters in the second dungeon which are essentially like 12 mobs attacking 4 people at once. That's pretty hectic, and you've got to work as a team. But ultimately, by removing one person, it means that everyone's a little bit more focused. You can play your roles a little bit easier. Healers have an easier time, and DPS actually have more to focus on. Effectively having to really kind of try and corral all of those mobs towards the tank and away from the healer if they can. It works surprisingly well. Now, the graphics and game engine, it is based on the Hero engine. I've made my feelings on Hero engine clear in the past. It's not a particularly great engine, and it still isn't a particularly great engine now. The rough edges in the way that the game kind of approaches its dynamics are directly tied, in my opinion, to Hero engine. It's kind of the limiting factor here in many respects. But that said, the graphics are actually top-notch. When you first visit that PvP area, one of the things that I was grumbling about the other day was how dark and murky this game felt. Well, as soon as you go to the PvP area, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's just brilliant sunshine and gorgeous looking environments all around, so green trees and so on. It looks beautiful, and it's so well detailed in my opinion. But it's not the best textured game out there. One of the things I noticed that when the game's actually running in memory, it's only using up about 1.6 gig, and that's, you know, with everything turned on full. So not the highest texture quality we've ever seen really. And you know, you can actually feel that within the world, but it actually has improved dramatically over beta and so on. And actually, as I start to move through the game, weirdly, I start to feel like the game is actually better developed through this next sort of stage, this level 10 to 20 areas I'm going through now, than in the starting areas. Now, that might be because the starting areas were suddenly kind of revamped, and maybe they didn't have as much time to kind of spend on them, but the lack of mobs, the lack of quests, and the lack of kind of feeling of solid progression through that first 10 levels feels a little bit broken at the moment, and potentially I think they're going to have to go back and kind of flesh that out a little bit. Things definitely become a little bit more full on as the game progresses, but that first section of the game, that first sort of level 10 levels, it's really not nice. So whilst I think ESO is probably the most old school MMO we've ever seen, at the same time there is actually something reasonably promising lurking under the surface. The real question though is, does Elder Scrolls have long enough to fix what's broken at the core of its game? Or are people going to get very bored very quickly and simply abandon it? It's a very long crawl. It's a game designed to slow you right down, potentially all the way through from what I can tell. Certainly the way the quest hubs kind of work is a little bit broken at the moment. You don't get like a quest chain necessarily that takes you across this whole world from beginning to end. What you find is you get small quest chains, and then the quest chain will end and you won't necessarily get sent on anywhere else. In part, the developers want you to explore, like Skyrim, like Elder Scrolls games do. But in an MMO, we're kind of used to a little bit more of leading by the hand. The problem there is there's a lot of content that I think is just getting skipped at the moment because there's no definitive easy marker, unless you're fairly close to where this new quest hub or quest giver is, that indicates go over here and get a quest. And likewise, I've tried the developers, just set off in any direction and you will find quests. And actually, no, that's not true. It simply isn't true. You can walk off in a direction you've never been down before, and actually you won't just encounter some quests. Not unless you kind of have to hunt around a little bit. Oh right, look, there's a marked thing over there. I wonder if I go over there and there'll be a quest. Oh no, that's actually where I'll have to go and fight the things or find the objects once I've found the quest. Well, where's the quest? It doesn't quite work as well as I think the Elder Scrolls team were hoping for. It's not a bad idea, but ultimately in a massive multiplayer game with so much content and so many people running around, a little bit more direction I think is necessary. Ultimately, one of the things we've always learnt with MMOs is players are stupid. The more players you put into a small space, the more stupid the players become. And that is potentially true here as well. Ultimately, there does need to be a little bit more of leading by the hand to make sure people aren't inadvertently missing chunks of content, and then ultimately finding themselves, well, as I am at the moment, a level 14 I think I am, fighting level 20s. Oh, and winning, might I add, which is another kind of game-breaking thing. I shouldn't be able to take on mobs 5 and 6 levels above me. I just shouldn't. In no MMO is that ever viable. Yet apparently, here I am, fighting mobs 5, 6 levels above me, and whooping them, literally tearing them down in seconds. For my mind, I could probably take on level 8, 9 levels above me, and probably then find a bit of a challenge. It's a little bit broken at the moment, that in the mid half of this kind of level 10 to 20. But again, these things can be fixed. Potentially the developers have let the reins off a little bit on some of the powers to make a slightly easier grind through for the first kind of few months. We do notice this quite a lot. Suddenly a patch will appear which says, oh, certain powers were, broken, etc. They were, over buffed, and we're going to rein that back. I always find it's really interesting that every MMO suffers exactly the same problem with certain classes every single time. I think a lot of the time it's actually the devs basically helping people to get tanks and healers up the leveling range at the same pace as the DPS do. Once there's enough of those spread across the level tiers, they then restrict that back. Same thing we find with certain exploits from a leveling point of view as well. Things that allow you to gain lots of XP very quickly. You'll usually find the first few days of a new game going out in MMO, those exploits are still there from beta, still able to be used, and ultimately it's to give everyone a quick boost through if you use it. No one tends to get penalised in the first few days for using something like that. But there's my thoughts on Elder Scrolls Online as we stand today. I'm going to continue my exploration, and hopefully this game will continue to grow on me, because there is something interesting here. It's just buried under a mountain of, well, poor execution really.